You know, when I heard that the theme of this convention was focus, I suggested to Bill that I start my talk today with a story about what happened to me in my very first week in selling. I was young, in my early 20s, and I was working in New York City, and my territory was Wall Street. So I was working with, banks and brokerages and financial services firm. And my manager, a woman that was really wise, on my very first week, she said, Michael, I'm going to do you a favor right now. I'm going to give you a little bit of a threat, but I'm also going to give you advice. Then she said, first, let me start with the advice. She said, it really doesn't matter. Every single meeting that you conduct should start with a good, clear, focused, and conversational agenda. And then she said, here's the threat. If you don't do it, and I catch you starting any meeting without a good, solid, prepared agenda, you'll no longer be working for us here at this firm. I was like, wow, that was a really powerful thing to hear when I was 25 years old. But when I look back on it, that was one of the best things she ever did for me. It got me into the habit of starting every single sales meeting with an agenda and preparing it in advance. And this is really one of the keys to great selling. Top performers start their meetings with agendas, and those agendas are typically clear, focused, and conversational. One of the things that I've found that top performers do that really works is that after that preliminary pleasantry step is over and you've been in it for a moment or two and it's time to get into the business of the meeting, simply say something positive about the person you're meeting with. Just a strength-centered comment to move you from that preliminary pleasantries mode into the meeting. Something like, John, I noticed on your website that your organization is growing quickly, and I'm really interested and curious to find out what's happening. So here's the agenda that I thought might be helpful for you and for me as well to get the most out of this meeting. So you see, a nice little pleasant, positive observation about the people that you're meeting with can be a great way to move into your agenda. The next thing that really helps an agenda be effective is think in terms of what matters most to the person you're meeting with. I've found there are two words that help agendas become more effective and certainly more appealing to the decision makers that you're meeting with. Those two words are helpful and useful. For instance, Bill, I was really looking forward to this meeting, and in order to make it as helpful and useful to you as possible, here are some of the agenda items I thought of that I'd like to get your feedback on before we move forward. So helpful and useful. I want to make this meeting as helpful and useful to you as possible. Those are two things that can really make your agendas much more effective. The next thing is almost every sales-oriented meeting, the agenda flow should be to listen, learn, and then present. Even if you're presenting, if it's a meeting where you're coming back for the second or third or fourth time and you've got ideas that you've got to present, it's almost always better to start with a quick summary up front, listen to see if anything has changed, and then move into the information that we're going to be presenting. So it could go something like this. Jill, I was really looking forward to this meeting today because I noticed that you guys are growing so quickly and looking for ideas to build your sales team. So in order to make this meeting as helpful and as useful to your team as possible, here's what I suggest. First of all, why don't we summarize what we went over in our last meeting? Then I'd like to hear from you about any things that have changed since then. And then finally, we can talk about some ideas our team has come up with that we think could be helpful for your team. How does that sound? Is there anything that you would like to add to our agenda to make the meeting more helpful to you and your team? So that's an example of a meeting where we're really coming in there to make a presentation based on information we've already learned. But we're going to start with a summary, get some feedback on whether or not anything has changed, and then finally we'll get to the real purpose of the meeting, which is to present our ideas or proposal on how we could help their team to grow and improve. So those are some of the keys to a great agenda. First of all, transition in with something positive about the person you're meeting with. Second thing is use those words helpful and useful when you transition into the agenda. Simple little phrases like, Fred, I was really looking for ways to make this meeting as useful and helpful to you and your team. So here's the agenda I suggested. That kind of phrasing really helps to establish rapport and communicate to the people that you're meeting with that you care about them, you thought about them, and you prepared for the meeting. And then finally, always think about the flow of your meeting. The best way to have influence is to listen, learn, and then understand before we seek to influence. And then at the end of the agenda, it's always helpful to ask a simple question like, what else would you like to add to our agenda to make this meeting as helpful and useful to you and your team? Those are really the keys to a great agenda. Make it conversational, make it interesting, make it non-threatening, and finally, you always want to communicate that the focus is on the decision maker. The meeting and your planning and your agenda is all about making that meeting useful for them. So those are some really simple keys to great agendas and ways you can bring more focus into your sales meetings. So let's talk about some other ideas that really tie into focus.